How to follow the rules of the richest to get rich while others become poorer. The percentage of adults living in middle-income households is decreasing. From 1971 to 2015, the proportion of adults living in middle-income households fell from 61% to 50%. Since the last time, we've experienced a global pandemic, record inflation, and now the threat of war spreading across the borders of Russia and Ukraine. This has not been good for the poor and the middle class. In a country where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, the straw is finally breaking the camel's back. That's why candidates like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have gained so much traction against traditional party politicians in recent election cycles. That's why we're seeing so much polarized discussion and violence. The American middle class is the spark that ignites a powder keg of dissatisfaction. Add to that wealth inequality. As you can see, the decline of the middle class has been happening for a long time, steadily, since the 1970s. Over the past 4 decades, forces have been at work that have robbed the wealth of the middle class and handed it over to the rich. Much of the anger in our country comes from the fact that people are being financially destroyed by these forces. However, they aren't fully aware of what exactly these forces are or what to do about them. All they know is that they want change. However, if they understood these forces and what to do about them, they would be able to solve the problem on their own instead of waiting for a politician to fix their problems for them. Here are the 4 financial forces that cause most people to work hard and still struggle financially: taxes, debt, inflation, and retirement. Take a moment and reflect briefly on how much these 4 forces affect you personally. Wealth-stealing force number 1. Taxes. America was relatively free of taxes in its early days. In 1862, the first income tax was levied to pay for the Civil War. In 1895, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that income tax was unconstitutional. However, in 1913, the same year the Federal Reserve System was created, the 16th Amendment was passed, making income tax permanent. The reason for re-establishing the income tax was to fund the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve. Now, the rich could permanently reach into our pockets through taxes. The secret of the rich when it comes to taxes is that they know how to use taxes to get richer. In fact, the entire tax system is designed to benefit the rich. That's why the highest tax rates are on earned income, i.e., salary, and capital gains, i.e., house flipping and day trading, while the lowest tax rates are on passive income and businesses. I talk a lot about this with the cash flow quadrant. Those on the left side of the quadrant, employees and self-employed, pay the most taxes, while those on the right side, business owners and investors, pay less. There's a difference between being rich and being truly wealthy. For example, the higher your salary as an employee, the more you pay in taxes. But the truly wealthy know how to earn millions without paying taxes, and that's why I actually praised Donald Trump when he was running for president. When Hillary Clinton tried to shame him for not paying any taxes, all Hillary did was feed on fear and ignorance. If people truly understood the tax code, they would celebrate the rich who pay no taxes because it means they're doing exactly what the government wants, creating jobs and building the economy through business and investments. The good news is that you can take advantage of the tax code the same way if you're financially smart. Wealth-stealing force number 2, debt. When I was young, my rich dad taught me one of the most valuable financial lessons of life: the difference between good debt and bad debt. Like most things, debt itself isn't bad, it's how you use it. My rich dad explained it this way: many things can be good or bad depending on how you use them. For example, drugs can be good if prescribed by a doctor and taken as directed, but they can be bad if you overdose. Guns can be good if you understand gun safety and use them for sport or to protect your family. They can be bad if a bad person uses them to commit crimes. Debt can be good if you are financially smart and use it to create cash flow, or it can be bad if you're not financially smart and use it to acquire liabilities. Everything can be good or bad, depending on how you use it. When people say something is always bad, they're speaking out of fear and ignorance, or trying to take advantage of someone else's fear and ignorance. So, when so-called financial experts say that debt is bad, they're appealing to the fear and ignorance of their readers and possibly exposing their own. many of these experts know the difference between good debt and bad debt. In fact, they likely use good debt to grow their own businesses, but they hide this information from their readers because it's easier and more profitable to push conventional wisdom: go to school, get a good job, save money, buy a house, and invest in a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. There's a perceived risk in using debt, so instead of educating, many opt to placate and make a little money in the process. The problem is that the old financial wisdom, the rules of money, are riskier than ever. Savers are losers, and the middle class is shrinking. The rich use most people's fear of debt to get even richer. The reality is that our economy is built on debt. Banks use debt to leverage deposited money many times over to get richer. The Federal Reserve System gives politicians the power to borrow money instead of raising taxes. Debt, however, is a double-edged sword that results in higher taxes or inflation. The U.S. government creates money instead of raising taxes by selling bonds, promissory notes backed by the taxpayers of the country, which eventually have to be repaid through higher taxes or by printing more money, which leads to inflation. Unfortunately, most people use debt to buy things like cars, houses, vacations, and other debt, making them poorer the more they borrow. They are also hurt by the effects of systemic debt, like inflation and higher taxes. Wealth-stealing force number 3, inflation. In 2011, an interesting statistic from the Wall Street Journal, according to the International Monetary Fund, showed that a 10% increase in global food prices equates to a 100% increase in government protests. Despotic leaders, entrenched inequality, and new forms of communication played important roles in the political turmoil now shaking the Middle East. New research by IMF economists points to another likely contributor: global food prices. Looking at food prices in cases of political unrest from 1970 to 2007, economists found a significant correlation between the two. In low-income countries, a group that includes Tunisia and Egypt, a 10% increase in international food prices corresponds to 0.5 more anti-government protests the following year. In the low-income world, an increase of double the annual average. Given recent trends in food prices, low-income country leaders, including China, may have reason for concern. In other words, when people are hungry, they rise up against their leaders. This statistic is interesting to me because I've been saying for years that inflation will cause global unrest. The reason for this is that when people fear for their lives, they fight for them. Of course, today we're facing some of the highest inflation rates in 40 years, and food prices today are threatening to break records. Ironically, they're at the highest level since 2011, when Wall Street Journal published the statistic about the link between hunger and unrest. What will happen now that the food shortages caused by the Russia-Ukraine war are threatening global food supply chains? More uprisings will happen domestically. Inflation is fueled by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury borrowing money or printing money to pay government bills. That's why inflation is often called a silent tax. Inflation makes the rich richer but increases the cost of living for the poor and middle class. This happens because those who print money get the biggest benefit. They can buy the goods and services they want with new money before it dilutes the pool of existing money. They get all the benefits and none of the consequences. Meanwhile, the poor and middle class watch as their money becomes thinner. The rich know they can borrow cheaper today than tomorrow, invest in cash-flowing assets, and let inflation take care of their debt. The poor use debt to buy liabilities that depreciate over time while the cost of living rises. Which game would you prefer to play? Wealth-stealing force number 4, retirement. In 1974, the U.S. Congress passed the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, requiring Americans to invest in the stock market for their retirement through vehicles like the 401k, which usually have high fees, high risk, and low returns. Before that, most Americans had a pension provided by their job. They could focus on their jobs and know they'd be taken care of after they retired. Wall Street had control over the country's retirement money, and most people had to blindly trust Wall Street because they simply didn't have the education and knowledge to understand how to invest properly. In a recent blog post, Why the 401k is a Path to Retirement Disaster, I talked about how 401k are harmful to the average investor, especially in the age of high inflation. In the world of stocks, many investors keep an eye on the Shiller P/E ratio, a price-to-earnings ratio based on the inflation-adjusted average earnings of the last 10 years. The median Shiller P/E ratio has historically been around 16 and 17, and it's a good barometer of what value we should aim for. Again, a P/E of 16 means it costs us about $16 for every $1 of earnings we receive from that stock. Today, a large portion of Americans has little to no savings for retirement, and an even larger portion is in 401(k)s filled with mutual funds that can crash along with another stock market crash, like in 2000 and 2008. This is what you call a recipe for a retirement crisis. In the past, companies took care of you for life. Now you have to take care of yourself. But most people simply aren't prepared for this. As such, they rely on experts to invest in paper assets through retirement plans like the 401(k). Meanwhile, these experts get richer, charging fees for every trade. Companies also adopt the 401(k) because they don't need to maintain a pension fund and can pay lower salaries because they offer a match. Obviously, they only have to pay the match if employees use the 401(k), and many don't. In short, companies that don't offer 401(k)s have to pay higher wages to compete with companies that do. Employees of those companies simply get their money as part of their salary instead of having to save it in a tax-deferred retirement plan they have no control over and that charges high fees. Once again, that's how the rich use retirement to get richer while leaving you poorer. The secrets of how the rich get richer. Here's the kicker: the rich know how to use these forces to make more money instead of letting them steal their wealth. The rich know how to make investments and run businesses that allow them to pay little to no tax. The rich know how to use debt and other people's money to make investments that provide constant cash flow while paying off that debt. The rich know how to make investments that protect against inflation and make them money while others fall behind. The rich know how to use all of these forces to have a secure retirement, provided by cash-flowing assets. The rich can do all of this because they understand how money works and have a high financial IQ. So, learn the rules of the rich and learn everything you can about money. Doing this may not save the middle class, but it will save you.